The United States is home to a thriving African diaspora that has made important cultural contributions. Each one of us has a different story, but we've all come to call this nation our home. I'm Mirshai Salu, a Montgomery County resident originally from Ethiopia. And this African Heritage Month, I take you on a journey to explore the influence African fashion, food, music, dance, and art has had in our county and nation overall. According to the Migration Policy Institute, as of 2019, there are over 3 million African immigrants living in the United States. Most of us leave our countries for familial ties and economic betterment. With us, we bring our diversity, talent, colorful clothes, flavorful food, and vibrant music. And with the rise in African immigrants, the African culture has become more prevalent and global. We start with fashion. Over the last few years, the demand for African attire has soared. We no longer have to look for festivals to get African clothes. We've seen stores sprouting in malls all over, making getting our hands on the colorful fabrics a lot easier. Busayo Shitu is a Nigerian-born fashion designer and owner of Bibire, a clothing line specializing in African attire. She knows that her pride for her culture and heritage is something that she'll never lose, which has led her to what she does today.
Bibire, it actually is huge. It means when you're born into wealth. If you've been born good, of good heritage, you can't use money to buy good heritage. You have it and you have it.
When Busayo first started her business in Germantown, she mostly had African customers. But over the years, she saw her customer base becoming more diverse and noticed the mounting excitement for African fashion in the community.
If there's ever a need or a moment to be proud to be African, this is it. The movie Black Panther came out and then people are like, wow. And people are now finally realizing that, oh my God, Africa is not just this poor continent. They started looking at the fashion and they're seeing designers come from Africa and design fantastic things. When I went to New York Fashion Week and we used African fabric, the ashoke, and people are like, what? This is from Africa? Yes, it's from Africa. So people really are feeling Africa right now. And I feel like in a few years' time, you probably go to Macy's and you see African dresses there.
African food is another area that has gained popularity over the years. African cuisines have been developing from home cooking to a more modern approach by chefs who are working to bring in new techniques that are adapted to traditional fares. This approach has helped African food find its place on the world culinary stage and shape American cuisine.
Marinate the steak.
Hatib Diouf, a Gambian native, is determined to introduce West African flavors to his community with some improvisation and adaptation. He invited me to his kitchen to learn how to make chu, a West African delicacy.
We have a very rich culture, and our hospitality and our food is vast. Africa as a continent is bigger than the US. I always talk about that. We also have a very rich cuisine that, when you try it, you'll become used to it and like it. We do use a lot of natural stuff. Tamarind, sorrel, which is hibiscus, which I incorporate in my baking just to Africanize the desserts that I offer in-house.
Hatib opened his restaurant Mansakunda in 2019 as a solution for the West African fine dining experience the region was lacking. And Takoma Park gave him the sense of home he was searching for.
There is no other place in this world that I would have ventured this establishment. This is the place that I know that is diverse in culture, that the people here are very curious. If I had to do it again, this is where I would open the store. What I was looking for was a place that can actually harbor my business. But what I found is a locality that actually resembles where I come from, the sense of community.
In addition to the food he serves, Hatib also wants to introduce the African culture through the many custom-made artifacts he handpicked from his homeland. His goal? To transport his customers to Africa for a full West African dining experience.
Everything here actually has a story. And because I wanted to create a place that I would call modern Africa, you know, a place that represents the continent for what it is now, you know, what has been portrayed.
African food is as diverse as its countries, and this immensely rich diversity makes African cuisines unique from region to region. Iman Musa, an Egyptian restaurant owner specializing in kosheri, Egypt's national dish, noticed that there wasn't enough North African cuisine representation in the area. So, she decided to do something about it.
I decided to name the brand after the traditional dish because I wanted people to know what kosheri is. And I jokingly tell my customers, now when you ever land in Cairo, you know what to order for yourself. But the origin of the word is the khichdi meal, which is an Indian meal. And this is a piece that I was very happy to discover. This meal traveled from India to England, and then it went to Egypt, and a lot of modifications happened to it and became the kosheri bowl.
Iman has seen her customers find a familiar taste in the dishes she prepares, which she thinks has contributed greatly to the popularity of African cuisines.
African food is on the rise, very popular. Egyptian food is now on the rise. We have several now Egyptian spots around the area. It used to be only New York. Now they're spreading out a little bit and other states around. So it is on the rise. People are realizing that those are very familiar flavors. The restaurant owners are breaking this fear of, oh, no one knows what Egyptian food is, so I'm not gonna make it. And they're starting to introduce it to the market. So I'm really optimistic.
To understand the origins of certain African dishes like the kosheri, which was brought from Asia to Europe and then to North Africa, I met with food historian and writer Emily Deach, who spent decades studying African cuisines.
The story of African cuisine is the story of what was there originally, what came through colonialism, what came through immigration, refugee situations also, and modernization and globalization.
Emily explained that although each of these different countries have a distinct cuisine, when it comes to the broader regions of Africa, there are still lots of commonalities due to the environment and cultural influences.
There are 54 countries in Africa. There are countless languages. Of course, it's not a monolithic cuisine, right? There is just diversity everywhere. In the north, you have countries, most people know, say, Morocco and Tunisia, heavily influenced from French colonialism. So you have some of the French names for dishes, classical French techniques, and so on, but then also Middle Eastern influence with the spices, with the kind of stewy dishes. That's where you get tagine, that's where you get couscous, and it all kind of commingles together. On the east, you have more Southeast Asian and Indian influences. South Africa is probably the biggest hodgepodge because it was Dutch, English, some Portuguese, some French, also Indian. So that's where they get their curries from. And then West Africa obviously has huge influences from the Caribbean, from Portugal, from those kind of the triangle trade between West Africa, North America, and South America.
African flavors have always had an influence on American cuisine dating back to the slave trade. This influence is even more widespread today, giving it a more prominent place.
I think for a long time, because of our social history as a nation, it wasn't seen. Something that was produced, for example, Thomas Jefferson's, all of his cookery that's considered American food was designed by his African-American cook that had so much African influence in it in terms of the dishes that he saw, but it was kind of considered or received as American rather than from African heritage. So I think there was a long history of it being influential but not seen.
Wherever there is African food, there is African music. Africa boasts a rich landscape of musical styles. From west to east, north to south, the African musical influence spans beyond borders and has been shaping music in the US and around the world for centuries.
Tenturu tama tama, singelina toma, singelinta sirabula, tenturu tama tama, singelina toma.
Shikamala Diabate, a Grammy Award-winning musician from Mali, has made it his mission to explore the connection between America's traditions and his own griot roots. Over the course of his career, he's connected the musical instrument similarities between the two continents.
When we talking about the banjo, American banjo came from the Goni. That time when I first come to America, they hear, because they already know the Goni, and they know the griot people play Goni. Many people, the African music have a lot of power in America. So African music influence now all the world. It's a many strong, lot of power. Anywhere you go is African music. Many things, even the blues, all came from Africa.
African music calls for some dancing. Preserved and passed from generation to generation, these dances have remained as rituals and spiritual traditions, creating a basic vocabulary of movement common throughout the entire African diaspora. Michael Friend, artistic director and founder of Soul Emotion African Dance and Drum, has dedicated his entire career to making the cultural connection between America and Africa.
It's my mission, and it's the organization's mission, really to sort of morph the lineage of Africa into who we are as African Americans, and understanding what that means. You know, born in America, but you identify with the lineage from Africa. In our performances, what people see is they see a morph of understanding what they, the cradle of civilization, the African connection through our performance, what we bring to it as African Americans, which is just this melting pot of all these different identities. So our inspiration is that of Africa, West Africa specifically, but we want to be able to identify ourselves in that as well. So people really get a sort of this morphing of who we are, who we understand is our background and our inspiration going forward.
Through his band's performances and their drums, Michael's goal is to teach the youth about their African heritage so they know where they're from and where they're going.
The idea of the dance and drum when we go on stage is very important, especially for young people, because we want them to understand sort of that connection, that power they carry just in their culture and their ethnicity. So it really helps to connect the dots. So I think for dance and drum, that's the vehicle by which, through the music, through the arts, that we get there. We lead the charge.
To experience Africa is to understand history and resilience. And no one expresses that better than a painter. In the heart of downtown Silver Spring, I visited the studio of Solomon Asfaw. Solomon, an Ethiopian-born painter, was inspired by the colors and surroundings of his home country. He's always wanted to tell his country's untold stories through his paintings.
I grew up at in the church, so growing up, watching those kind of paintings, iconographic paintings. And I don't remember even when I started painting, because since my childhood, I used to paint, the slums, the shanty towns, the old roofs, the electric poles, and the hustle and bustle things, that crowdedness, the dirty things, that muddy things, I see colors on that things and also stories.
That's the hustle and bustle you were talking about.
The hustle and bustle, yes, you're right.
After he moved to the US, he expanded his work to include elements from his new home, hoping to bridge the gap and connect his East African roots to American traditions.
When you travel, when you go anywhere, it's still with you. So you add up something into it, and it's kind of fusion. So also that creates something beautiful.
Solomon sees a promising future for African art and artists, which he says has become more seen in the last few years.
The time is for Africa, right? So now the African art becomes like the music, the art is booming. The people are watching, and a lot of collectors are interested and buying artwork, and these artists are becoming, well-known in big banners and big art shows. You see now a lot of African artists from Nigeria, Ghana, Ethiopia, all over Africa.
We continue to share our stories, from the clothes we put on our backs, to the kitchen of our homes and restaurants, to the music we listen and dance to the canvas that reflects where we've been and where we're going. Our culture lives on in the people who work every day to preserve our African roots.